Oh, really?
I can turn the video off.
I'll be in the back. So.
There we go. I turned it off.
Okay. Good.
Good.
We good? Ready to go?
I think so. Like we should be ready to go.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate yes, you all taking the time out today to come to discuss nutrient management as it relates to NRCS or conservation programs. Plenty of room up front. Always. Come on up. Again, appreciate you taking the time today, go through this, definitely impacts how we plan, develop, and deliver conservation specifically to this practice in Kansas. Certainly appreciate you all you TSPs and those future TSPs, we hope, getting online and helping us deliver this really important practice across Kansas. Certainly from water quality standpoint, it is a priority for us in Kansas to deliver that. So you can help us do that. So we'll go through the Kansas specific elements, or excuse me, Elliot will go through that process. But maybe a quick round of introductions, maybe might be prudent. So again, I'm Dean Crable, I'm the State Resource Conservationist from Kansas.
Mark McClure, project engineer with Terracon. Go ahead. Jared Green, I'm with KLA Environmental Services.
Clint May, KLA Environmental Services. Morgan Fairman with NRCS.
Chip Reason with NRCS, administrative assistant. So,
Kate Glanville, State Water Quality Specialist with NRCS.
From the ground, everyone.
I'm Caitlin Becker, I'm the environment engineer too.
I'm a catcher, natural resource specialist, paid off the program. Brad Yonker, national organizer.
Oh, Tom Roth, Technical Service Provider Network.
Nikki Malfa, PSP for Great Plains Precision Ag.
Anthony Smith, TFP, Program Supply. I'm Kevin Hart here, with Great Plains Precision Ag.
Portland Soil Services.
No, Gozo, Portland Soil Services.
James Stroll, Heartland.
And my name is Elliot Carver, and I serve as the state agronomist within RCS, based out of here in Salina.
There's folks online too. I don't see where they're at, but I guess we'll have them on the recording. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Elliot. We get started. Really informal. Ask questions along the way. This is again, Elliot will cover the conservation practice standard, the implementation requirements, all things that are germane to Kansas planning, development. Check out all that stuff for nutrient management specifically as we employ this to help deliver conservation through EQIP and CSP, which is probably where most of you have your interest in. So Elliot, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dean. Well, good morning, everyone. As I already said, my name is Elliot Carver. Thank you all for taking the time to come out here today. Excited to talk with you a little bit about kind of our requirements of CPS 590, our nutrient management practice standard. I printed out all of our slides. We got those shared with you, so you guys can refer to those, take notes if you want. You're also welcome to throw them away, whatever you need to do. But we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe. Okay. All right. So start out, just wanted to give a brief agenda of pieces that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do a review of our practice standard criteria, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of a discussion around soil sampling and kind of how we should typically approach soil sampling. Not a real deep dive on it though. And then kind of get into the meat of this discussion, really talking about documentation and certification of our practices, and actually go through a couple examples for Precision 590 contracts. And then really, as Dean mentioned, want this to kind of be a more informal opportunity and a chance for us to just talk, figure out what's going on, what are the needs of you guys, what farmers' needs, et cetera. So we'll have an ample portion devoted to questions and discussion. So starting out with practice standard criteria. In 3 steps, how would you define 590? It's on your slides, so don't look at it. Soil sampling. That the only part of 590? Yep. Document it. Thank you for reading, Noah. Yes, don't over reply. So yes, to try to keep things big picture here, when it comes to 590, the three main pieces that we need to remember is that involves collecting soil samples, determining a maximum allowable rate, and then not over applying beyond that rate. Folks can always apply less, but don't go over the max. That's it. Those are the big pieces for 590. I'll go in a little bit more and talk about some of our tools that we have. So the first thing that I really want to kind of reiterate and really focus on today is communication. So communication between the NRCS and TSPs and your clients is the key to success for your clients. We have to have conversations up front about what our requirements are, be it nutrient application call or documentation requirements. We have to be having those conversations up front to set the producer up for success. And one of the tools that we have to do that is on the next slide. Not sure what's going on here. One of the tools we have at our disposal are these producer requirement checklists. So these were put together, I believe, last year, or actually probably 2 years ago, and put up on the Field Office Technical Guide. So it's a public-facing website. Anyone can access that. It's not limited to just NRCS. The general public can access it. But we put together 2 sheets, one for our basic 590 plans, or really kind of whole field nutrient management, and one for our precision plans. And what these checklists do is they go through, they list out the required activities, provide a brief description of what that activity entails, and then has a section for due date and completion date. And then the piece that I think is really important is down at the bottom, we have a producer statement saying that I, the producer, agree to complete everything on this check sheet by the deadline. And I recognize if I don't do that, there will potentially be a delay of payment or I may not get paid at all. Really, these sheets are intended to kind of force that conversation up front of what the requirements are of 590. So I outlined kind of the 3 main pieces of 590 soil sampling, determining maximum allowable rate and not over applying. So now I'll talk a little bit about soil sampling. The main things here is that all new 590 contracts must have soil samples that are less than 2 years old. So if folks already have existing soil samples, they can use them to determine their first application rate as long as they're less than 2 years old. Going into our basic 590 plans, samples need to be recollected every 3 years. Each composite sample needs to be comprised of 15 to 20 cores apiece and need to represent areas no greater than 40 acres in size. For precision plans, samples need to be recollected every 4 years. Each grid sample is again composed of 15 to 20 cores per composite, and those grids should not exceed 3 acres in size. So the biggest difference between basic and precision soil sampling is the area that the soil samples represent. This information is outlined within the practice standard in tables 2 and 3. And so each one of these tables going to go through in details, sampling depth, what we should be analyzing for, the maximum age that the soil samples can achieve to continue the plan, and then the number of cores per composite. So soil samples that are collected for P, K, organic matter, pH, and buffer pH must be collected from 0 to 6 inches. So this program, we utilize Kansas State University's fertility recommendation systems, and those equations are based off a 0 to 6 inch sample. So we have to have a 0 to 6 inch sample for that. Profile nitrate samples must be collected from 0 to 24 inches, or you could do a 6 to 24 inch sample if you're pairing it with a 0 to 6. For basic plans, both that 0 to 6 and 0 to 24 samples should represent, again, areas no greater. This says 4, it should say 40. And then for precision plans, the 0 to 6 inch samples must be collected from grids not to exceed 3 acres in size, but our profile nitrate samples can represent areas no greater than 40 acres in size. I'm kind of sticking with nitrate. Profile nitrate samples must be collected less than 6 months before the first application of nitrogen to that specific crop. Under normal climatic conditions, yes.
Is that? Because the basic says shouldn't represent areas greater than 4 acres in size, precision 40.
So I apologize. Under the basic point, it should say no greater than 40 acres. It was
Okay,
as a typo. And then for precision plans, our surface samples or 0 to 6 inch samples represent grids no greater than 3 acres. But our profile samples or 0 to 24 inch samples can represent 40. Okay. So just to restate, our profile nitrate samples need to be collected less than 6 months prior to the first nitrogen application for a crop that's going to be receiving nitrogen. Under normal climatic conditions, those samples must be collected to 24 inches deep. The only exception to this would be if we're in severe drought or depending on the soil type, or if there's particular landscape impacts. But if you're going to use an exception, this must be fully documented as to why you did not collect those samples. Another piece related to nitrogen is never utilize the 30-pound N assumption. So in K-State's MF 2586, they had a statement that said if you did not have a profile soil sample, you could use the 30-pound assumption. That is not acceptable for our program. So the NRCS, any NRCS published conservation practice standard supersedes anything put out by any other entity. If it is not in our practice standard, you cannot do it. That's it. So all of our maximum N rates must be based on profile nitrate samples. But what about legume crops that require P? We know that the majority of our P fertilizers all contain N. We're kind of limited by that. So in that situation, like we have beans that we're going to be putting on MAP or TAP, we don't need to pull profile sample. We just need to document the amount of N that's going on with that P fertilizer. And again, there's no penalty for it. It's just tracking, just from a nutrient budget standpoint. We're not going to force people to go put on rock phosphate. Sorry, this one is a repeat.
So question on that, I guess, if they're growing beans and they don't apply anything, around a 590 in that rotation, we're still certifying no application of fertilizer, we're still in the field office and they're still gonna make payment on that.
Right, folks are always allowed to apply less than the maximum allowable, right? As long as they're meeting the producer objectives. They pulled the soil samples, right? They're still getting paid. Good questions. Okay, now moving away from that first piece over to the second piece of 590, that's determining maximum allowable rate. Our max nutrient application rates are determined using Kansas State University's fertilizer recommendation system equations. We must make certain that we're using the equations. And it's important, again, to recognize that different nutrients require different soil sampling depths to calculate that. And for P and K, we need a 0 to 6 inch sample, and for nitrogen, a 0 to 24 inch sample. And I didn't state this, but under 590, the only 3 nutrients that we're worried about in P and K. pH, but pH isn't a nutrient. So to help calculate out our maximum nutrient application rates, we can utilize the 590 implementation requirement. And I'll go into what this is a little bit later, but this is a tool that's been built to kind of help simplify the nutrient calculation process. When determining our maximum allowable rates, all nutrient sources must be accounted for. And so we need to know the source, the rate, placement, and timing of those nutrients. So this leads us into another question. What is starter fertilizer, and is it different than any other fertilizer? All right, so starter goes on the planter, not different than any other fertilizer. Anyone else feel differently or have different thoughts? I know people have thoughts in this room because I've talked to a lot of you. Okay, all right. No one has thoughts. But starter fertilizer specifically refers to a specific rate, placement, and timing of fertilizer application. And what those are is a low rate near the seed at planting. It's just a rate placement and timing method of fertilizer application. And as such, fertilizer applied as starter counts towards the total nutrients that are being applied. So anytime we're putting nutrients out, we got to count it towards the total amount that's going on. Another way to rephrase this is if there's a K-State recommendation for N or P that's 0 pounds per acre, no amounts of N and or P could be applied. And again, I stated this earlier, the NRCS Conservation Practice Standard 590 supersedes MF 2586. And some of you might be wondering, is there ever a time where a producer may apply starter? Caleb. The P and K equations have not changed in the newest.
I would make a motion to put that old one.
I think it's there now. I know we were talking about putting it up. I don't know if it's currently.
That's
Yeah.
the main big problem.
Yep.
is They're referencing old documents and there's no access.
Publication's been updated.
Yeah, it's been updated. But we haven't
Can't use
switched.
it on any new contract.
We
What's
can't-
in effect when the contracts are written?
That's not that we have to
The
use.
equations and everything else that's referenced in it.
Right, but we are required to use the IR to fill out that IR the way it is. There's no new equations in that IR. Once Elliot comes out with the new IR with the equations, then I see myself.
Well, but the document,
The standard says you'll use the
well,
equation.
standard says so, but the nutrient application stuff from K-State's.
Correct. Yes, in January, they published a new fertilizer recommendation guide for nitrogen. It's a simpler, more liberal equation. So,
And I guess if not, inside the standard, put the link to that specific MF 2586 from 2003.
it is that particular, it's cited in there. There's not a link currently, but
Now,
we,
whatever you need to do to make it a link to
I,
that document needs to happen.
Yeah, when
because
there's a revision made to our 590 standard, the equations will be directly listed in there and there will be no external referencing. Well,
It's on the engineering side.
yeah, there's supposed to be a new national one probably coming out in FY26. Okay, so going back to this question, thank you guys for asking questions. I'm more than happy to keep discussing. I do want to get through this stuff. So is there ever a time where a producer could apply starter? Kind of put together this flow chart. Is first question you need to ask is the maximum allowable rate for that nutrient, 0 pounds per acre. If it's yes, can't put on starter. But if it's no, you could, as long as you are including the nutrients applied as starter in the total nutrient amount. So I want to talk a little bit about crop fertilizer response and kind of connecting this back to starter. I think it's important to be able to discuss these things with producers as to what's going on. And the first thing is that when it comes to fertilizer response and fertilizer recommendations, for phosphorus and potassium, they're based on this kind of basic relationship that when we have a low soil test value, we see a higher response to applying fertilizer than when we have a higher soil test value. And another way to rephrase this is as soil test values increase, the likelihood of positive response to fertilizer decreases. Now, this is just a theoretical graph, but this trend actually plays out when we start to look at field data. And here is a 22-year study that examines the impact specifically of starter P on corn response based on soil P levels. And what we see is that when our soil test P gets up above about 20 parts per million, maybe like 3, the crop response to starter P is pretty negligible, 0.3 bushels. But when we're in a lower soil test situation, we see a higher response. And I would argue in those lower soil test situations, definitely be putting on some of your P as starter, get it close to the seed. We're going to see a positive response, but in that higher soil test situation, the likelihood of response is very low. So now I'm going to move it over to soil sample collection and test interpretation. Before I do that, any questions?
Okay, that includes the crop removal rate. And removal.
Can you rephrase your question? Are you talking about total recommendation? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. So recommendations for phosphorus and both potassium and nitrogen follow, or sorry, just P and K follow the same general principle that you're looking at your yield goal and a crop removal rate. And so if we're specifically looking at a build and maintain equation, we have two pieces. We have the build portion and the maintenance portion. That maintenance portion includes crop removal rate, which will change based on what crop you have. So when you have a higher yielding situation, let's see a greater need for fertilizer.
So when we have precision and you're taking your 0.6 samples, 1 to 4 years, we're taking high yield irrigated corn off, calculate the removed rate from the soil instead of
We've not done that. So the question was, if we have a high yielding irrigated corn system, are we going through and calculating the nutrient removal with that corn to use that to adjust what the application would be for the following year? You're talking about continuous corn or what, or?
well, just in years that it's corn, like we took a sample, let's say 2 years ago, we took a 220 bushel corn yield off. It was at 0.5 part million. We've had high yields in irrigated situation. We're not at 25 part million anymore. We have to have, does the producer have to pay to go get a new sample pulled, or can we just do the math on to back calculate that to show what we estimate it is today?
You need to follow the criteria that's listed in the standard. And so that is for a precision plan, we regrid sample every 4 years. If a producer is more than welcome to sample more, but programmatically, we can't pay for it.
It has to be within 6 months, right?
6 months of the first application of N. Yeah.
Could we take, if producer has good yield mapping after that season, we just do sufficiency. And we take that yield map and make a variable rate recommendation based off that yield map to replace what was taken off.
So I will ask you this. How standard is nutrient removal in crop tissue?
In crop tissue, not very much, but in grain,
Well, in grain,
it's pretty, you're gonna
So
see your
it-
high and low areas.
right? So under a high yielding situation, a low yielding situation, how does that impact the nutrient concentration of the grain?
The nutrient concentration in higher yielding areas is generally lower than low yielding areas.
Right. So see,
Dry land.
I'm not trying to be argumentative. What I'm getting at is we need to, if we were to go that route, there needs to be a full protocol developed on how you would determine that nutrient removal rate. And from talking with Kansas State, they don't encourage that. To use, basically look at yield, come up with a standardized value, and then use that specifically for to estimate what your soil test would change. You could do it if you went through and sampled everything, but not part of our program. I mean, we're kind of getting outside of the requirements of the practice standard.
The simplest thing you could do.
It's free sample, free soil sample. But under our programs, we won't pay for you to grid sample every year. And that's pragmatically, that's the way it's set up.
So
So,
I wasn't asking about paying for it.
yeah, I mean,
Using data, like, do we have to account for that in areas that we do have high yield, and we expect those levels to drop, maybe from a threshold of no application to application? What can we do to determine if that has changed? And soil sample is the only answer.
right, soil sampling and just the way things are structured currently. We can't.
But we just have a few points out there, just go repull those specific points. Like load that new data in.
Guess I can go to a 40-acre zone composite type deal to adjust the
Yeah.
whole thing up or down.
Yeah, you could do, as long as you initially grid sample. Basically, I think what Brad is getting at is going from full VRT to actually nutrient management zones. And under our precision plans, folks are welcome to manage nutrients on a zone basis. It's the same payment rate as full VRT.
It'd have to be less than 3 acres.
Your initial samples. You can change your zones. Just use those initial samples to help develop what they are.
Once you have a zone, you just sample on a 40-acre zone. In year 2. Good job, Steve. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, you're not going to get paid,
Yeah. No,
right? So that's the thing.
When you're pulling those 40s feed profiles anyway every year. Based on zones to fully adjust that up or down.
Yeah, just set up your profiles that you're pulling yearly. Do it as a paired sample of 0 to 6 that gets analyzed for PK, organic matter,
Yeah,
and nitrate, and then do a 6 to 24 and just analyze it for nitrate, figure out the weighted average.
supersede the good sample.
You could use it to adjust. They're just not going to get paid for it. That's the thing. Yeah,
but then now you can really hone in on exactly what that crop removal rate was.
Yeah. 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 I think the way you're outlining it, Brad, makes a lot of sense.
Based on the zones under 40 acres. And they have yield for each zone. So.
Yep.
It accounts for that. Not saying that's not expensive, but.
Any more questions?
Sure, that's okay to throw out the grid sample data in year 2 and just go off zones. Like it just sounds like
But you're still using the grid sample data initially to define your
that
zones.
makes sense.
Then you're allowing 0 to 6s to be pulled on 40s to adjust for the next crop. Did I hear that right?
I think as long as you've pulled those grids initially and you plan to repull grids in 4 years, you could use your current year to adjust within that zone.
All of the grid. Right, here's the information.
Yeah.
So I put this in the IR correctly.
Yeah,
Is it what we did?
yeah. Let's talk more about it. I'm not opposed to it.
I want to make sure. I'm
Yeah.
clear.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Noah.
From here.
In the ideal world, we would be able to pay folks to soil sample every year. We can't.
And they gotta go, like was mentioned, they gotta pull. Too worried about that.
Yeah.
Care less about the dollars. I'm just worried about the rules and making sure I'm not giving you proper recommendations and guiding farmers into not getting paid.
I will talk with folks to get something clear out. Okay, good questions. Well, let's keep rolling. Talk a little bit more about soil sample collection and test interpretation. First piece is, what is the purpose of a soil test? So a soil test provides an index of nutrient availability, and really it actually predicts the probability of a crop response to fertilizer. And it also helps us evaluate the fertility status of the soil. And really what it does is it actually explains why responses are observed and how corrective action could be taken. When it comes to soil testing, it is the foundation of nutrient management, and it's the foundation for determining maximum allowable nutrient application rates. So this brings us to our next question of what is the greatest source of error in nutrient management? Is it A, collecting soil samples, B, analysis of the samples, C, making a nutrient recommendation, or D, applying fertilizer?
A and B.
A and B?
Analysis would go back to handling, how you handle those samples before they're submitted.
Right. And I think you can make the argument that handling, again, would go right into collection. Yep. Yep. So collecting soil samples is the greatest source of potential error. I mean, it's the first part of nutrient management, right? If we start out with something that's not good, that's going to get worse and worse as we move down the line. So again, just to kind of restate this, soil analysis and nutrient recommendations are only as good as your soil samples. So what makes up, how should we do soil sampling? What makes up a quality sample? Again, for fields not utilizing grid management, our sampling areas represent areas no greater than 40 acres in size. However, if we have established history, so 3 previous years of soil testing, we can increase that sampling area to 80 for our basic plants. As far as, it's not directly stated that it has to. We can utilize other information. We can look at soil type, right? And just, I know for you guys out west, a lot of times your fields, there's 1 or 2 soil types. Some of that will be planter discretion. But also when we're
Why,
from 40. So if you have a, that's a great question.
I mean, let's just make this simple, straightforward, so there is no question whatsoever. These guys know what to do.
This is really refreshing because when we initially told folks to do 40 acres, the immediate complaint that I got was that's too stringent. We should let people decide what size area they can
I
sample.
wasn't in that meeting.
No one here was.
Let's get rid of that. That's-
Unless you're gonna directly give details on what you mean by history is well established. It's gotta be.
So it's in the standard. It says 3 previous years of soil test, yield data, soil type information. Yeah, I'm fine not allowing folks to expand it. It's when these are not the people that we need to convince. Yeah, I mean, I would argue from soil sampling protocol, I probably wouldn't want to go more than 20 acres.
Leaves more a gray area.
It does. It does. Oh yeah, you can sample whatever size less than that you want. It's just,
I don't know the.
yeah. Well, based on this discussion, I think you guys will like the next slides. So, last piece on here is that soil samples, we need to separate them out by unique characteristics, right? So this is things like cropping history, manure application, cultural differences in the field, different yield responses, areas of high, low, or medium yielding, soil types, and really any kind of feature of that field that might influence crop nutrient removal and or soil test values. So as an example, I've got a field here where farmer came in and he was able to purchase all of the area surrounded in yellow. He has this imagery, but his plan is he wants to plant it all to 1 crop. That's their new strategy. And he wants to know how we should soil sample it. So kind of the first thing that I think, I guess before we go into how I would break it up, how would you guys break it up? Or what are some things that you notice about this field that might be impacting nutrient removal or yield differences?
Chickens. Water.
Yeah, do they have chickens? They're not going to tear the house out, so they're not
No,
going
it's
to.
not like they have
Yeah.
chickens around. Homestead.
It's different crops.
Yeah, it looks like there's probably some different crops here.
Irrigated,
Irrigated versus non-irrigated.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big one, irrigated versus non-irrigated. Looks like maybe we've got a road kind of on the right side, so things might be different on either side of the road. Maybe that could
Even how the drainage is, the dark spots.
Yeah.
Look like a lower spot.
Yep. Yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah, then kind of moving over to, let's see here, up to this area. What do you guys notice? Is that showing up? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like we got what might be an old fence row here, kind of suggesting maybe they were managed differently. Could have, again, could have had livestock. Yeah, so these are all great points and kind of follows along with how I was suggesting we broke it up. My first thing I noticed was the pivot. And so I split the pivot into 4. You can split it depending on the size of the pivot into as many pieces as you want, but kind of treat each one of those different shaded areas as its own composite sample. And then I went ahead and grouped the corners because it looked like they were cropped the same. And then kind of came down to this bottom right portion. I just split it in half and then moving over again, separate sample across the road, and then treating that little pasture area. That's a couple different samples. That's quite a few samples. That's about 10 samples or so. 11. I can't count. Yeah. Yeah, that's just an example of how it's kind of a good approach for doing this.
So if 3 blues are grouped together, do you only need 1 sample?
Yeah, so if you were grouping them together, because I would pull a third of my cores from one corner, a third from another, a third from the fourth, and group it together. Because it looks like if we go back, that this whole area was cropped the same. And we don't have a soil map, so we could put a soil map on here, but let's just assume it's a similar or uniform soil type. We know that those corners are gonna be a little bit different than what's going on under the pivot.
4 section pivot is probably about a 7-acre core, roughly. 21 acres.
Yep. Yeah, still less than the 40. Okay. Any questions? This kind of about thoughts behind and things like this. I mean, from talking with you guys, it sounds like we're pretty similarly aligned in the importance of soil sampling and how we would split stuff out. We'll probably do things a little bit differently, but generally it's about the same. Okay. Yes, Morgan.
That documentation. Could be as simple as just a map penciled out showing this is how we divided up the acres. I traded school.
Yeah, so producers are required to show where samples are collected from. And I recognize that not everyone has access to the newest and best technology to generate pretty maps. I would be okay if you just have a map, the producer highlights where the area is. Okay, so sticking with soil sampling requirements. Again, for our basic plans, the main thing here, this is from table 2, we kind of broke it down by depth, analyses, our maximum age, and then the number of cores required per composite. I just wanted to highlight here that for basic plans, we need to recollect samples every 3 years. And then for those profile samples, they need to be no more than 6 months old at the time of the first in application. Then similar information for our precision plans. And really the thing here is regrid sample every 4 years. And then still with those profile samples, we need to be collecting them no more than 6 months before the first in application to a particular crop. And I like to kind of throw this piece in here for folks that haven't worked with precision sampling a lot. But the main thing is that precision 590 plans require a tremendous amount of soil sampling. You know, the principle behind collecting a sound soil sample does not change based on the area that you're sampling. You still need this around 15 cores to get a good sample. It's just going to give you more detail in the field. And I think that this image here on the, oh, sure enough, it's right there, that the principles do not change whether you're doing the whole field zone or grid. But I think this image is kind of interesting that if we start on the left, these were collected on 3/4 acre grids, the 0.75. We see that we've got some pretty significant variability in this field, but as we double it, we still can kind of see what's going on, and then double that again. Now we're starting to lose a little bit of the differences, and then when we go down to 7.6 acre grids, it just looks like we have a high and low area, and we kind of miss out on all the true variability that's out there. Then the last piece for soil sampling, is I like to think 4 steps to success when soil sampling. 1 is make sure you collect a representative soil sample. 2, determine the quantity of plant available nutrient in that soil sample. Then you interpret the test results, and then you estimate the quantity of nutrient required by the crop or determine a nutrient recommendation. And again, we hit this earlier, soil analysis and nutrient recommendations are only as good as your soil sample. Kind of sticking with soil sampling. We found out we've sampled, we have a test. Now what? I think most of us have probably looked at soil test reports more than we'd like to admit, but just again, to kind of, for those of us who haven't, just going to hit each, it's a little different, okay. So soil tests can vary based on what lab you use, but they all generally contain the same information, right? We've got information about where the samples or the sample name, the depth, what was analyzed, et cetera, how things were analyzed. But really, no matter where you get things from, they should contain the same basic information. The one piece that I do want to highlight is some of our test reports also include a section on recommendations. Now, our practice standard requires folks to use K-State's recommendations. So if you're working with a producer who gives you a soil test report that has recommendations and says they want to follow it, ignore it, unless it's K-State's. And really just with this, again, just want to reiterate that the maximum allowable rate must be made using the K-State University equations. A lot of labs will offer nutrient recommendations. They might be close, but they don't necessarily align with what's being put out by K-State.
So when they do that, then say they do actually put K-State University.
The recommendations for P and K are going
I
to.
know, but but
yeah,
that would be eliminate a lot of confusion.
The IR that's available in the field office tech guide does have the old equations in it. So
if you're filling out the IR that's online now, it'll use the 2003 version.
if you need.
Well, no, I'm just, well, I'm just talking about the Certifex of the world, Midwest Labs of the world. Had the document, and they had it in their program, and they can read these, and they can automatically make the recommendations to K-State recs. That'd be sweet and handy.
I've had a Certitech one come back and it said K-State Rex, but it was 40 pounds over. Taking into account and so you gotta be careful, even if they do have it, just throw it in yourself and just see if it matches.
It would be handy.
No, I'm not even talking about TSP sitting in this room, the guys doing it on their own. They can tell Case or Certitech that, hey, I need K-State recommendations using. MF 586, and then they go pull the wrong ones and then they're high or low or whatever.
Yeah.
This is where that confusion, communication thing is going to break down.
Yep. Good point. When it comes to soil sampling, we showed a few test reports, but folks can also turn in sampling maps. And so soil sampling information can also be conveyed in this manner. Okay, so once we have our soil samples, now we need to go and figure out our maximum allowable rate. And to do this, we utilize the implementation requirement. And really, this is an Excel-based tool that's designed to allow users to input cropping systems and soil test information into it, and then have it automatically calculate the maximum allowable rate. I recognize that there's some current issues with the IR as it is posted now, but Kate and I have been in the process of creating a new updated version, and I hope to have that out by the end of the year. This IR that's currently exists, and as will any that follow, allow for the automatic determination of a maximum allowable nutrient application rate. And the nice part is that it provides insight into how those rates were actually determined. So the IR is available on the field office technical guide under section 4 under 590. But if you pull it up, it's an Excel document and it currently has like 6 sheets in it. The first one is an instruction sheet. Then there's the cover sheet, the sheet title 590 basic, one title 590 precision, operation and maintenance, and then a fertilizer calculator. The cover sheet is where you can go and enter just general producer information. And talk a little bit about the purpose of the contract. Information here will actually auto-populate into other portions of the sheets. And then throughout the entire sheet, all gray or shaded boxes require user inputs. I find the instruction cover sheet are pretty self-explanatory. But really, when we get into the basic sheet, there's really nothing basic at all. It serves as the main workhorse for the implementation requirement. And so within this document, we need to enter our cropping system information and soil test data, and then it will automatically calculate the maximum. So over here on the right, we have the implementation requirement pulled up, and up top, we have our cropping system information. So we go through enter the current crop, previous crop, and next crop, and then utilize the realistic yield goal for what our current crop is, and then list our previous crop yields. And then we come down to soil test information. And so in our soil test information, we enter our nitrate values, our P, K, pH, organic matter, and buffer pH. And then it goes through and tells us what our actual credits would be for those nitrogen equations. There's a section where we can add in information on things like irrigation water. In some places, we have high nitrates in irrigation water. We irrigate, we're essentially fertigating. We can also enter things here, like our analyses for any kind of compost or manure that we're putting on. And then we also have a section that actually determines the recommendations for that particular crop. And so Kansas is kind of unique in the United States in that it offers really 2 fertilizer recommendation systems for P and K, a sufficiency and a build and maintain. And so the IR actually goes through and calculates out what that recommendation would be for both systems. Then if we move further down the sheet, under the nutrient sources section, this again further breaks down nutrient credits. And then the red values for line 10 or number 10, line 57 are the maximum allowable application rates based on the current management system. Once you go through and enter like what's being applied, what's going on in the starter, or what you might be flat rating, or if you're applying any nutrients with manure, calculates that out of the credit, takes it away from the rec, and then leaves you with the remainder that you could put on. The piece to highlight here is that producers can always opt to apply less, as long as they're meeting their goals. Moving away from the basic sheet over to the precision sheet. The way this sheet was created is that primarily focused on logistics. And unfortunately, to check precision application rates, we have to use the basic sheet. But what we do is for precision rates, we'll actually use whole field averages and then go through and can check it on that way. And I have an example on how that can apply. All right. You want to take a quick break? 5 minutes? go ahead and keep on moving. Sorry, folks online, I had muted you, but hopefully you can hear me. So kind of moving away from soil sampling and determining our maximal allowable rates, we actually need to go in and talk about what sort of documentation is required for certification. So for every practice standard on Photog, we include a statement of work. I think Peter didn't have enough coffee. Okay, here we go. Every practice standard has a statement of work, and on the statement of work, there's a list of deliverables. So this list right here was directly copied from the 590 statement of work of all the deliverables required for checkout. These include things such as record of implementation, the extent that the practice was applied, example or guidance for record keeping, which I really want to focus on. And really, again, I talked earlier about communication, but it's critical that we are talking with our clients up front about what kind of records are we going to need. We need to know like what the crop that was produced, when it was planted, the yields, soil test information, nutrient application information. Again, everything highlighted on number 3 from A through F. The other piece that we need to focus on is that we need to keep this information, but that our as applied information needs to include the form, rate, method, and timing of nutrient application and how that was done. So I've reviewed a fair number of plans where I get an as applied map that just says we put on X pounds of product, but it doesn't tell me what the product was. Or it'll say urea sulfur blend with no information on the breakdown. There's no way for NRCS to actually certify and determine what was put out. We need to just make sure that we can actually determine what is put out. So at a minimum, the producer needs to supply NRCS, or in this case, TSPs with the following. This would be results of applicable soil sampling. So this would include initial soil samples and any maintenance samples that were taken. Then other tests such as a manure test, irrigation water, etc. if you're concerned about those things. We also need realistic yield goals for crops that are going to receive nutrients. And an easy way to determine realistic yield goal is take your average yield history and just multiply it by 1.05. There's 5% more. I think we'd all love if we could set records every year, but it doesn't always happen.
So is that at the standard? 'Cause I got mixed guidance from field offices on that, from every different field office.
Yeah. So the way the standard is currently written is it says you'll take the average of basically the 3 best years you've ever had in that field and average it together. So if there's no history, this is where it gets a little bit tough. Current recommendation is to utilize county averages, which aren't always available, but I know they're low. They're low. It's encouraging folks to keep records and show actually what's going on in the field. You use crop insurance information, things from FSA, those sorts of things. If we don't have any history.
The history from previous.
Yeah. 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 Noah brought up the question of could we get yield history from previous landowners or tenants? I think that's fine. If it's the same crops, same field.
I've been told no.
We're not gonna need it.
Yeah,
They know who they bought it from, right? Absolutely, they can go and obtain that information at the previous owner. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna protect our producers and voters like we will.
Right.
As a TSP. Yeah.
Well, and I guess my concern with the realistic yield goals too is every year, especially out west, is different. You got 6 foot of profile moisture, you're gonna crank that up eventually, or if it's like it's gonna get into a wet pattern like AKA 2019.
Yeah.
2020, you're hitting 150 bushel yield goals on Milo out there. And 2023 and 2024, you're lucky if you cut anything. Can they adjust those based on climatic conditions if you got enough documentation saying, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing versus taking an average times 1.05?
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up with nutrient recommendations basically every year. So, yeah. You could, and again, if you have the history, like if you know in wet years that you can do much better.
Out there, it's
Yeah.
Determined on winter moisture and profile. Moisture.
Yep.
Period.
So if you give them a wreck, starts raining, and they, well, it starts raining, can they say, I think it's above average either, we adjust this? If they
That's-
have the documentation.
That's a great question.
Say yes. As long as you had new script run, your
Yeah.
soil sampling.
I think that-
Realistic.
Yeah. No. The piece that I get leery about is someone coming in, saying, okay, this is my max rate. And then they're like, oh, actually, I'm going to grow 50 more bushels. So that's why I put more on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now you got 60, 70, 80 bushel potential out there. I mean, that's gonna go. What you initially had as a yield goal, 30, now becomes a yield goal of 60 or 70. And most of these guys are top dressing anyway, so they can then adjust that or.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may be, I think that. Intensive management, especially of wheat, is becoming a thing out there, and so they're doing multiple applications of fertilizer across that based on climatic conditions and environmental conditions.
The nice thing is you can always put less, so if you start out in higher, you'll go just in the first place, whether it's gonna rain or not. So you just do less and you learn what you.
Yeah.
But the faucet and scratch.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting topic. And I'm not
So what
not
about
opposed.
natural disasters? What about
Yeah, they're bad.
tornadoes? You know,
Yeah, like if there's damage, I guess.
like happens, I guess,
Yeah.
is there just like, oh, act of God, we don't have to worry anymore? Or,
You're saying like if there's a crop failure, what do we do the following year? Or do folks get paid? Like,
I don't know how it affects all of the payment,
Yeah.
don't know how it affects all, is there any regulation or is this more just guidance?
yeah. So just for my clarity, is you're asking like if there's a natural disaster or a crop failure.
Yeah.
And can folks still get paid for 590 if they don't do anything?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Dean, I don't know if we've really dealt with crop failures before. I mean,
the last couple of years of drought.
Oh, yeah.
You
yeah,
guys planned on doing in-season stuff.
Right.
Happened to us. A ton.
oh yeah,
You
yeah,
Guys planned on going out there and doing their precision applications. And
yeah,
did, right?
right.
Harvest
I
everything.
didn't do it.
So it is a great question to bring up.
Yeah,
You can always apply less.
you can always apply less. Yeah, I guess I think programmatically, the question is like, do you just move the contract or?
Yeah, probably depending on when all that occurs, and
Yeah.
yeah, we could modify the contract, CIN in the next year, if in fact we did get a massive disaster prevent plan or some other thing that would cause, right, I guess the lack of application because of it, right? It's not choice, if you will, so we can modify contracts and so that work. Otherwise, if we've already applied the nutrients, and then you have a natural disaster, which you're gonna, you've done your job, producer, you've met the recommendations. We're still going to, issue payment. We'll probably want to account for the lack of, crop use of that facility the following year or something like that, right? Just.
Yeah.
To think through that.
Yeah,
I'd be careful I'll just say this, I think we all understand this, right? If it's dry and it ends up raining, for the drought cycle, back and forth and then a very seasonal, if you will. How many times you want to, develop an IR for somebody that's wanting to adjust their expected yield results based off of pure precipitation within a very narrow window of time. To me, that doesn't seem like it's good use of our time. I think we get our maximum rate based off, the best known information, yield expected and run on down. And then, you can always apply it.
Yeah. So I think kind of going back to this question, like if there's a crop failure, maybe a way to approach it is if you've implemented any part of the management strategy.
Yeah.
Folks could still get paid as long as you've implemented part of it.
And just provide documentation back and build that when you've got it.
Yep.
But how to justify that thing.
Soil sampling count.
That's a great question. So would just soil sampling count? I'm inclined,
So Elliot, hey, this is Gay.
go ahead.
So I just want to emphasize there that those are specifically handled on case by case basis. And the field office will do a finding of fact. And the action that's determined as needed will be dependent on what the circumstances were. It could be modification, and it could be payment. But it's going to be based on a case by case basis.
Thank you.
Into a few situations, we've had excessive rainfall, we're running short on nitrogen. So we're actually gonna be needing to apply additional. Demand as to when we saw it, I mean,
Yeah, I think that's
Say
good.
probably up to soil.
Or tissue.
Yeah, they're do pre-side dress nitrate test.
use imagery.
Yeah. You can use sensors. That's in there as well.
But visual symptomology.
Just saying looks yellow to me.
CC agronomist saying it's. See?
No.
Okay. I'm checking, because I always said that. Cheaper for the farm.
The good questions. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing to think about is once we see visual deficiencies, we've already had a yield hit. It's too late. So the question is, if folks want to go beyond the maximum allowable rate, would they need to collect a new test? My initial response to that is yes. You would need a new soil test. Now, trying to time everything is going to be a bear.
That'd be a lot of fun in corn that's 6-8 foot tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk out.
You'll need another test if you want to go beyond it. Or use imagery.
The only problem with the imagery is nothing really numerical in that yet, but tells you what it's lacking.
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult to, just based on imagery without being in the field. It can show low NDVI and it could be sulfur, it could be nitrogen, or high NDVI spot might be a patch of pigweeds just growing gangbusters. I mean, you need to, I would pair any imagery with something.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the question of on imagery, you can do no nitrogen check strip if you're chasing nitrogen.
Right.
Or what's more common is actually a high check strip.
Yep.
Is the high check strip allowed? Because you're over applying in that check strip.
Yeah. So the way I would approach it is if you wanted to have a high check strip, you just take that out of the total acres. It's just
Not get paid on.
right. It's just going to be a strip.
Check.
There is the potential. We have adaptive nutrient management. This is a different payment scenario, which
The documentation on this. I don't need to be running.
it's on farm research trials. So that's what it is. It's out there. Okay, but good questions. All right, so we just talked about realistic yield goals, records of what's being produced. And then we also need the records of nutrient application. Again, this includes the quantities, analysis, and source of nutrients applied, as well as the dates and methods of application. And some examples of this include things such as applied maps, weight tickets, or per field invoices. For our basic nutrient management plans, we need to know the soil sample date and the planned application rate. We need to utilize the new IR to determine those maximum allowable rates. And then for proof, we can use things such as per field weight tickets or application maps. For precision NMPs, we need our grid sample map, maximum allowable rate map, or we often call them the prescription maps, and then an as applied map. We will utilize the field average for soil test to determine the maximum allowable rate. And then we'll compare the field average to the average applied across the field. We'll see if we're within the tolerance. And so for N, we have a tolerance of 10% or 10 pounds per acre. And then for P, it's also within 10% or 5 pounds per acre of the max allowable rate.
Heard a lot of chatter on. Go over what we have to turn in.
Yeah.
I don't see it in anywhere. I looked ahead a little bit, but I don't.
Yeah.
Good time to talk about yield.
So I've got more some stuff on yield. I guess, are you just elaborate more on, I'm happy to talk about it now. So just elaborate more.
I think so, yield data, with the way that intercodes especially work on a timing basis, we're needing to turn in documentation for the year before yield is taken on. The concern there, and then yield data.
Yeah.
The data we get a lot of times is trash. Can we use imagery combined with scale tickets to show a general yield map? Yet or not, but
Yeah.
I've got documentation on university write-ups on doing that.
Yes. So you're talking about showing yield results for the year that nutrients were applied and not yield data to determine realistic yield goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely, it's in the statement of work, which is from the national statement of work that will document it. Just being totally open, it's not something that we've really forced the issue on in the past.
Yeah. I think it's very valuable to what we're doing.
Yeah.
But there's the timing issue, and then
Only if it's calibrated too.
and
Yeah, that's
yeah,
its own.
just the modern data. I don't like modern data.
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't want to go through and clean it?
Well, then there's the whole issue of, I'm dealing with guys in precision nutrient management that don't have yield monitors.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So just double check, make sure something like that, find out scale tickets, whatever, we have to turn that in, whether it's the following year, whatever that.
Yeah.
Logistical programs.
Yeah. I think some of it is the discussion we need to have on. My initial thought is, what are we doing with the yield data? Is it, are we using it for something or not?
That's the thing. I mean, I've been told that the yield data needs to go with it.
Yeah.
But we're turning this in 2 months before it's harvested.
Right. Right.
Can't have both ways.
Well, and the yield mapping is just a total crapshoot. As far as calibration, I've been machined for 3 different years and we can't get time when you come into the crop on another deal. And so you got 0 yield on this side and then you got 150 bushel yield on this side. And getting that, and then especially with older machine gatherers, we put on a aftermarket yield deal. Low yielding crops, it doesn't break with the crap.
Yeah.
Not enough on the paddle itself to actually do it. I think from the standpoint of having this weekly satellite imagery, whether it's Verticus or from these other products, that is really kind of honing in on those specific spots better than I think a yield map can. So as long as that would be an option, I think that's something that should be added to it. And if they got recalibrated machinery, but
I know.
What about, like, say, farmer invests in planting and they have daily
satellite imagery. Is what's worthwhile to you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of what I mentioned to Dean, is I think that's a discussion that we need to figure out internally.
I would recommend. If there is something to work on.
It's not,
But.
One in Texas.
Well,
Experts in the room. Yeah. These guys say something here.
It's gonna still, you can see me being a kind of a, use it when you get. Leave it as it is, no big deal. If it's gonna be a required thing.
Yeah.
We need to get better documentation on all of that, so I'd be more than happy to leave it as a kind of a. As applicable.
Yeah.
Data thing, but, because honestly, I think the biggest problem is the payment side of things, like, you can't turn it in by the deadline. When the crop's closed. Leave it as it is. Long as it's. Data is done. Data, but
this is good to hear. Not saying it's a good thing. No, I'm just happy to like be talking about this. What's going on? Okay.
bigger picture question, what data points are you trying to track across the state and why?
Great question. So the question was, what data points are we tracking across the state and why? We kind of stepping back, we're not necessarily tracking things across the state. It's more that our 590 program is specifically designed to promote and protect surface and groundwater quality. And really the principles behind that don't change no matter where you are. If we see excess nutrient loading into surface water, especially phosphorus, we get algal blooms, excess nitrate leaching. We see problems with groundwater. So those are the big pieces that we're concerned with. But as far as trying to track nutrient loss in different portions of the state, that's not something that we're doing. It'd be interesting. I'd love to see it, but as someone who's
The only correlations we can offer is, we have, Camp Department of Health and Environment tracking based on MDLs, surface waters,
yeah,
all the measurements that they collect. And then we have a nationwide SEEP report that is produced that is basically a culmination of all that, state level data. But we don't have the ability currently to that at the level.
yeah, and
Not direct.
And I've done an extensive amount of work with edge of field monitoring, and it's extremely expensive, and it is not something that someone can just do part-time. Tom knows this firsthand. Yeah, you can't. It's a ton of work. You gotta know how to program the equipment. You gotta be out there in a day whenever it rains. You gotta hope that when it rains, you actually get runoff. And then you got to get enough data to go through and actually figure out what's going on. But I hope the mice don't get in and chew the wires, or the things don't freeze. It's a mess. It's really interesting stuff when it's all functioning. But yeah, but great question. Okay, so let's keep rolling on for our precision 590 plans. Requires nutrients to be applied based on either grids or zones throughout the field. And the main takeaway here is that precision plans are not flat rated. We have stated that if someone goes and collects grid samples and then just decides they want to follow the minimum rate, that's okay. It's just a general way to think about precision plans is they're not flat rated. And so as far as max rates for N, P, and K, for N, the maximum application rate can't exceed the greater of 10% or 10 pounds N per acre over the calculated rate. Phosphorus is the greater of 10% or 5 pounds over the calculated rate. And then potassium is 10% or 10 pounds over the calculated rate, with the exception of being documented chloride deficiencies or applying manure.
TSPs deal with field. operations.
Field office to field office
Yeah.
differences.
Correct. But, so on this, so need to be applied on a variable rate basis. So we can do, as long as we're not over applying based on the sampling.
Right.
As long as we're not over applying anywhere. Would flat rate be okay?
I'm okay with that.
These field offices are telling us. no.
Yeah.
Field offices are telling us there must be a variable rate application every. Which scares the crap out of the farmer.
Yeah, I mean, they're still applying less than the maximum allowable rate, and they paid for the sampling. That's where I'm at with it.
And that's what,
And I mean, this statement of like, basic is whole field, precision is not whole field. It should just get folks to understand, and in principle, that's what these are. I mean, there's still much more requirements for precision plans than a basic plan. Like 10 times the amount of sampling. Okay, so now let's actually do a couple examples. So we're going to start out with a precision plan, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to do two examples for these, one for nitrogen and then one for phosphorus. So the thing that's important is that whenever we have a precision plan, producers need to supply the location of the grid samples where they were collected in the field. They also need to supply that sample information, and that information can be either in tabular format, like table, or it can be given to us as a map. So here we have a map showing our phosphorus source or our soil tests, and then this was the product recommendation rate. So the question is, how do we actually certify a variable rate nutrient application? And first piece here is that the most accurate way that we could go and actually certify this would be to reverse engineer the planned application map. And if we were to go this route, we have to start asking a couple questions. And these are things like, well, what variables or layers were used to determine that recommendation? What equation was used? Can we actually get that data to try to go through and do that calculation? So instead of reverse engineering that, we can utilize field averages to estimate nutrient application. And apologize that my animations are off here, but for variable N rate, things that are nitrogen rates are based on a couple of different factors, and these include yield goal, organic matter, profile nitrogen, and then the previous crop. We have to also account for any N that goes on with manure, irrigation water, etc. But again, kind of the main pieces are yield goal, organic matter, profile, and previous crop. Adjustments can vary based on whether or not you're in a warm or cool season crop. So some of that will change based on mineralization rates. And then, sorry, this last piece here is that this is the equation that we've been utilizing. This was published by K-State in 2003 for nitrogen rate, and it's the equation that we'll use in this example. And so here they say that the N rate is the yield goal times 1.6 plus 20 times the percent organic matter minus the profile N minus manure N minus any other N sources, and then adding in the previous crop adjustment. So in this example here, we are given a yield map from a producer. So on this map, I recognize things are small, so I blew it up for us. This map includes the min, max, and average bushels per acre used on this field. So looking at this, we know that our average yield for this particular field is about 182.44 bushels. But if we go through and then just take that and multiply it by 1.05, so again, just adding in 5%, equals out to 191.5, or about 192 bushels per acre is the average yield goal for this particular field. So we've got our average yield goal. And then here we have our organic matter, because we said organic matter is a critical component of the N recommendation. And what we found here is that the minimum in or organic matter in this field is 1.5%, the max is 3.6, the average was 2.5%. We'll utilize 2.5% for our average. Now moving over to profile N, I did not have a fancy N map, so I hope you can handle my great skills here. But went through and we assumed that on this field, they split it up into 4 different areas to sample, and we found that the average nitrate value here is about 35 pounds per acre that was left over in the profile. So if we take those values for yield, organic matter, and profile in, we can plug it into our in recommendation equation. And we find that our maximum allowable N rate for this field based on this information is 182 bushels per acre. You might notice I went in and I included 40 here as a previous crop adjustment. In this particular field, we're going to corn, the previous crop of soybeans. So there's a 40-pound in adjustment for soybeans as your previous crop. We figured out maximum allowable rate, 182 pounds per acre. The producer turned in an as applied map showing how they went through and actually applied all of their in. And what we found is that they have a minimum of 89.27, a max of 150, and then an average of 123.91 bushel or pounds per acre of in. So remember that maximum allowable rate was 182 bushels. The min was, and then their average of what was applied was about 124. 124 is less than 182. We're good to go on this field. Any questions so far? Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Not doing it over total acre on Rex. That would be a lot.
So in this example, they applied everywhere. Yeah, if you have a situation, and I can pull up some other slides that there's area of the field that you know will not get anything, we would take that out. Yep. So now moving over to phosphorus. This is just a slightly different example of just kind of some documentation that we might get turned in. This producer shared some pea soil tests here, and then when we looked at their max, min, and average, we found that the average soil test P for this field was about 28 parts per million, maybe like 3. This particular map also included cropping system information, which is nice. Tells us that they were growing soybeans, they had a yield goal of 60 bushels per acre, and then they utilized a 6-year build and maintain recommendation system. So here on the top left, we have our soil test information, and then for the sake of this example, this is our as applied information on the right. But what we can do is we know they used a 6-year build and maintain equation, and so we can actually go through and we can do the math to see what that rec would be. And if we take our equation, which is 20 minus whatever your current soil test P is, take that value times 18 divided by your years to build, which in this case is the 6-year build. Then we add in our crop removal rate. So we had a 60 bushel yield goal for beans. 1 bushel of beans removes about 0.8 pounds of P2O5. So go through solving for our PREC. In this example, we found a PREC for the whole field would be about 23.82 pounds of P2O5, or again, about 24 pounds P2O5. So we've got our recommendation. And then this map also included some as applied information. We got our rec of 23 or about 24 pounds of P2O5. This map stated that they applied 100, the average application of DAP was 105 pounds. 105 times 0.46 gives us an average application of P2O5 of about 48.3 pounds. 48.3 minus 23.8 is almost 25 pounds for that example. Yep. So that doesn't work.
Oh,
Okay. Does that make sense? Utilizing averages. It gets a little funky when we have really variable fields. But it can still work. So now we've got about half hour left. I'm happy to just open the floor for questions, discussion.
I just want to make from variable rate, fertilizer application does not have to take place as long as so max, because the checklist says at the bottom, utilize variable rate technology. So as long as they're under the max, they can flat rate.
That's, yeah. So, okay, if you go through, like, if you looked at, we'll get there eventually. Okay, so like, if we had this sort of data, right, we can go through and figure out essentially what an application rate would be for every single point. You could go through and flat rate at whatever that basically minimum rate would be. You paid for grid sampling, and they're under applying.
So there's a 50 part million grade one, or I'm sorry, it's maybe 3, but 50 either.
Yeah.
way. There's gonna be a zero rec at that point. We tell guys, at that point, you can't apply. You go down until you hit the area where it starts getting your recommendation. At that point, so anything down to 1 ppm, 3, you can apply a flat rate for those areas, but you have to exclude the areas that call for nothing.
Yeah.
In that case, that would be a variable rate application because it's on and off. So
Right.
that's still variable rate. But on fields, let's say that they're all values below 20 part million. At that point, they can apply a flat rate. And what you're saying is up to
Yeah,
the
here,
lowest recommendation. You can't ever apply on one spot. So
yeah, let me,
applying in any one particular area. That's what you're saying.
yeah, let me,
It goes 50 to 100 pounds. You can apply 50 pounds flat rate across the whole field.
But you couldn't apply 100 because that's over applying another.
right. I think this map here kind of shows a good, oh,
So these are all your recommendations. As long as you don't exceed 65 over the entire field. You're applying here, you're under applying there, you're under applying.
but then I think kind of where you were going, I think like in this example, we had potassium. And we found that really we only had these couple areas of the field that we would need to actually apply any product. And so we sampled the whole field, but we're only applying it to these areas.
If you should flat rate something across this entire field, you'd be out of compliance.
Right.
Because there's areas.
Yep.
But on fields that the entire thing tested low, you could have it flat rate across the whole thing.
That doesn't happen very often either.
No, and that's what guys, like, you better be prepared to variable rate apply.
Yeah.
Because that happens more often.
Yeah.
Than.
I was under the assumption we had to have a minimum rates being applied across.
Well, this is two different rates, 0 and then X.
Zero the rate.
What happens if you over apply? What's the penalty?
So, yeah, they don't get paid, right? They're issued a 153. They're out of compliance. They have a year to make up for it. And then if they don't, we terminate the contract.
Compliance. And then they say, oh, shoot, I'm out of compliance. I'm not gonna apply at all.
Again, well,
Like, so you said they're out of compliance and you give them 1 year
yeah,
to get in compliance?
basically the concept of this is if someone's not meeting the criteria of the contract. And I guess program staff, if you guys are on, feel free to chime in. If someone is out of compliance, we can issue a 153, basically saying they are not meeting the criteria of their contract. The next, they don't get paid that year. They have another year to make up for it. And basically, when we think about crop rotation, right, we're gonna be doing things a little bit differently the next year. So I gotta make sure that you're doing things exactly right for that crop the next year. And if you're out of compliance again, terminate the contract.
All right. Yeah. Hey, this is Tim Waltmer, Equip Program Manager. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Tim.
All right. So we're talking a 1-year lifespan practice. We're talking 10-year statutory limitations of Equip for Farm Bill money. And we're talking statutory limitation for IRA is 9/30 of 2031. So it's a little bit different depending on what contract money you are managing, whether it be Farm Bill money or IRA money. So the first year that we find that somebody is out of compliance for a management practice such as nutrient management, 1 year lifespan, we do not pay for that 590 that year. We write a 153. We give them the appropriate amount of time, not to exceed 1 year, to do the proper implementation requirements of the 590 practice. And we push that everything forward then 1 year. So if you have 5 years on a 10-year contract, you're still okay. Now, the second year, you still did not do the implementation requirements correctly. You still have a resource concern out there. You're still not, as a client, providing the NRCS the appropriate documentation to certify a practice. The state conservationist can give you 1 more year to do that. So the only thing that I want to ensure that I correct is you don't, like Elliot said, your contract is terminated. Termination of a contract is provided through the delegation of authority to the assistant state con for programs. Nobody else has that authority to sign a letter to send to a client that says that they will be terminated with X liquidated damages or Y cost recovery for a practice that has been paid for that is not being operated and maintained. So again, that's just to clarify exactly what we are dealing with when we do a NRCS CPA 153 programmatically.
I'm sorry, this is probably gonna muddy the waters further, but is that done across the entire contract? Is that done per field? So they had a whoops on the field, they forgot to follow the rest.
Yeah, Tim, I don't know if you could hear this question, but this was a good one that came up, is if we have a contract with multiple fields and one field is out of compliance, does that impact the contracting and issuing a 153?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. And it goes back to, these are individual contracts with the NRCS, and they are looked at a site-specific finding of facts situation. So
I think maybe the broader question, is it an all or nothing situation? You either have all fields are in compliance, or if there's a single mistake, then nothing's in compliance. It was a question. It wasn't.
yeah,
Elliot,
yeah,
I
Long
think
pause.
it goes back to what I said. These are case by case basis. We can't sit here and make a determination without knowing what the specifics are. In a lot of cases, no, it would be site specific, but it's going to depend on what the situation is. The TSP's role, if they are a part of the contract, if we're paying for the services, they need to ensure they're providing all the documentation that producer needs.
And also, this isn't a specific question about a specific circumstance. This is just me, like, if this comes up and a producer tells me they overapplied, they give me documentation that I have to turn in that says they overapplied, they're gonna want assurances or reassurance from me that they're not completely screwed. So the explanation of the year of, get your crap in line or we'll move forward. I appreciate that. That makes total sense. I was just curious about, like, on a single field, if they do have an oops, because a lot of these guys, it's not their entire operation in the contract. And they're doing their standard basic nutrient management or no real nutrient management on their other fields. If they forget to switch over and do the thing the right way on the field and catch themselves halfway through that field, in that situation, I guess just in general, like, is it looked at on a per field basis or is it looked at a whole contract? And if it's just kind of on a field, case by case basis, if that's the answer, great. That's just what I'm looking for. I can tell the farmer, I don't know what's going to happen. I just want to know if there's specific information. Sounds like there's not. I just wanted to know that for just my knowledge.
Well, or contracts that have 590 in it, cover crops, no-till, all three of those combined. He screws up on one field on 590. And potentially the next year he might screw up again and then the entire contract is potentially terminated based on over application of 5 pounds of nitrogen on something.
5 pounds over would be acceptable.
Well, okay, 11 pounds. 10 pounds.
So again, I will go
Or
back
can you
to
just-
NRCS CPA 153 can be written on one contract item number on one field that is out of compliance. So I heard in the background, a producer has multiple resource concerns and multiple practices that are being applied to a schedule of operations. If a contract item number and that practice is implemented correctly and certified, that particular practice on that particular field gets paid. It's one PLU, one resource concern, and one practice that addresses that resource concern can be certified and paid on if the implementation requirements are correct, or can be under non-compliance if it wasn't. Does that make it clear?
Yes.
Yep.
Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Good questions. Any more questions?
I'm dealing with the office. When we turn stuff in, we do oftentimes get a lot of questions like, well, why did you do it this way? You did this. We need this. Yeah, just a ton of variability from field office to field office. And I know everything gets up to your level, whatever person that goes to. Do we just tell the field office like, or can more guidance be given to the field office on how to deal with stuff from TSPs? Like Kristen, before she moved on, she said it's supposed to be a administrative check of are all the pieces of the puzzle there, not the field office determining if the pieces are in the right place or not. But it drives us nuts every year. Field office will be like, well, we're missing this. We've been given guidance that you don't need that, and it slows us way down. Just how do we deal with field offices as TSPs? I know that's probably not a question directly for you, Elliot, but
Well, back to
I've heard new
providing
PSP
an
coordinator.
example, Elliot, of what is actually needed in a packet, awesome.
Yep. We can do it.
So, Leslie Spikes will be your new TSP coordinator. She got that. She's new staff, and so we'll work with Leslie to provide this feedback. Consistency is always important. You all are expected to deliver the same thing. Our field staff is expected to deliver. So we'll manage that information exchange here pretty quickly. So on this one in particular, because it's some of the other things. So,
I think the nice
thank you.
thing that since everyone here is a TSP, there's no chain of command. You guys can call whoever you want. So
So in just in that space, you all know, right? So the first two plans you develop probably in an MU is probably going to be reviewed by the individual that job group for you in that, right? Or the area agronomist, depending on what the level of job group 40 is for that particular practice. And then you all are also subject to 5% spot checks, in any given year, just to be transparent. I think we talked about that, but when by that, and we'll be doing the spot checks out of the SO. So Elliot, like the 590, will work with Tim, identify what practices for equip with Jeff for CSP, and identify those that you all are helping design. So we'll do the spot check. So that's kind of the architecture for the spot check. The local reviews are probably going to be done by the MU. If you're working in Marion, if you're working with Matt Meyerhoff, if you're working in Kingman, whomever it may be, right? The supervisor responsible. And to your point, maybe Noah. So, when we certify that this practice is complete, aka paid, we want to make sure that we have the accounting of it right in the as we check those off. You all know that. So again, this information transfer is going to be really important. So all know what you're supposed to be providing. Our field staff knows what they're supposed to be receiving. Put that loud and clear. Thank you.
And I think one thing that you said that I just want to reiterate is MUs will check the first two plans. And that will be the case for every MU, right? If you go and get checked in one MU that does not give you carte blanche to submit stuff everywhere in the state, the other MU is going to do the same thing. Yeah. Good questions. Any more questions, concerns, hopes, dreams, fears, complaints?
What do you need for documentation? To himself, that does he apply 2 gallons per acre, or do you need a note to count that for credit? Or what do you
Yeah.
need on that?
Yeah, so the question is, when folks are buying fertilizer in bulk, how do we, I know, how do we document it? I think, Dean, you know the exact policy number. But I'm pretty certain the guidance that we've been given is in situations like that, a statement from the producer, signed statement saying that I put on this much as starter.
Separate.
Yeah, that's a good question.
On the precision side, if they're accounting for that and their overall recommendation,
Yeah.
I think you just count that as a credit, all right? If they're
Yeah,
like 2
yeah,
gallons.
Yep. Yep.
Underneath the recommendation, and I have a variable rate map that has that already credited to the entire field. With a flat rate of
And that's the biggest thing, is making sure we're accounting for it,
Yeah.
right? We got to also, I mentioned this earlier, but if we're putting out pretty much any form of phosphorus, we got to account for the end that's going on with that PD. So, yeah. Right.
Why 2 gallons or 5 gallons an acre at 1034 road? Not still either. Not in the 590 plan, you can't. We got areas out there that are too high in phosphorus.
Or field are all low, so. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're terrible.
Good point, Jeff. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
So we don't run into very many like that.
And you're back. Okay, what about in the MF 2586? Okay, state has put in there is benefits for using low amounts of starter. The benefit is 2-3 pounds, whatever the case may be, or AKA cold soils when they're planting corn, whatever the case, pop up, get going. There gonna be any kind of leeway on that going forward, especially with these low amounts of guys running it. Especially with all the biologicals getting put in, are these fulvics or whatever in furrow.
So I will counter your question with a question. Who published MS 2586? Is K-State NRCS. If it's not in our NRCS practice standard, can't do it. We have a box for those. It's in 442. Hey, he brought it.
That's my request would be that the group, the people in this room, along with NRCS, get into a technical committee room and visit about what happens in the real world. What NRCS requires, what K-State requires, and not that we have to mesh it together or even just discuss.
Mhm.
Because I think what's actually happening in production agriculture, even though we're after the environmental bit on the NRCS side, totally agree, there's issues out there. But some of the minor things just to help with crop production that a lot of people have been using for 50 years that in the grand scheme of things probably doesn't affect anything environmentally, AKA high potassium and applying manure out west because every soil has high potassium out west. Well, where's the manure in Kansas? Out west. So one of those things that
There's an exception in the standard if you're applying manure. It doesn't, you're not limited by potassium.
Recommendation heard though, I think there's a lot of value in having a technical committee that is focused on agronomy and TSPs, the university, other research, all of our agronomists, et cetera, would be part of that group. I think that's an easy thing that we can check a box on. More importantly, get the feedback, right? Kind of explore what all is happening in the real world. I mean, that can inform not only us as an agency in Kansas, but also has potential to, inform corporately, right? What we do within practice standard, all that kind of good business, which, by the way, I think the 590 standard national is out in the Federal Register for review.
How do we
Speaking
know?
of that a little bit,
It's a little bit ahead. It's not,
not quite there yet.
no.
So when
I'm
that
supposed to work-
does,
supposed to
yeah.
work on it.
What's that?
I'm supposed to work.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were supposed to.
Yeah.
Project. So when that does, we definitely want to get that to you all. We try to do that to the technical committee and trying to have an important practice standards out in the Federal Register. That's your opportunity for the public to communicate on that particular practice standard. So as soon as that gets released, we're going to make sure you all have access to that. That way you can, your voice can be heard.
Do you guys need any data analytics? Like big data analytics for a county, thinking through trends, maybe near lakes where there's harmful algal blooms,
Yeah.
tying that together, telling a data story?
Can you, you just give me a
I
little
use
more,
Power BI
more examples? Like,
to
yeah.
do dashboards for business development for Terracon.
Yeah.
And then recently we've been doing PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substances data analytics.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
So if there's any way that, if there's a certain project that could use data analytics, let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you for, I can't think of anything right now, but I'm sure that there's data. I want to know more about it. Is where I'm at. If we can use it to figure out what's going on, what's working, what's not working. That's always good. Thank you.
Us as TSPs get access to like the maps of where we need to target. Like if we have a grower approach us and they're outside of it,
Yeah.
they're wasting their time applying.
Like priority areas and
Yeah,
those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Data layers, no.
Not a PDF map. I want the actual,
Yeah.
Give me a shape.
I mean,
I don't understand why it's so top secret.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's not my decision. So, but
Dean?
because with the number of applications that come in for sure.
yeah.
No, that's a, sorry, question prior to the meeting, and certainly appreciate that. It's certainly worth exploring again. And we're given some more latitude in some of our data commons areas. If you, I'm not 100% certain what that really means for accessibility to outside the firewall, right, if you will. But there's definitely some opportunity, like with DASC and geospatial data sets that we rely on heavily, but it's not going to be specific to priority areas necessarily outside the PDF map. And I understand the pain of that. I do. So definitely we'll want to pull in the technology staff, program staff to explore what those options might be at this point within the latitude that we're given. But right now, it's you're going to be bound to those paper maps or copies and digital stuff. But
Do you want to just share your question with the group? Just what it was related to the data?
Oh, the actual data layers, not just the paper map. I use Q extensively. I want to be able to not get the shape file from the grower.
Yeah.
I can lay it out over that data layer. Okay, you don't have anything inside of priority.
rethink about just jumping through all the hoops. I do have another question. I was on a conference call this morning. And I have a hard time believing it's true, but are TSPs gonna get access to card? I put him on the spot.
You see the smile on my face. The probability exists. You know, we have some upcoming calls to, I think maybe a couple of you have said it on some calls with like CIBO, which is somewhat of a transferable process of that. I don't really have access to part, but it may be access to the data sets and how we can import that into part. This is where it gets really Greek to me, but it sounds like there are things in the works. I just don't know what the status of that is.
Okay.
No, we won't have access, but there's tools that can talk to card. It's just a one-way communication.
Yeah, one, right?
Well, I want it both ways.
I do too.
I'm greedy.
So, I mean, the big element of CART, right, is you have access to all the data, right, to all the questions that are being asked in CART. That's publicly available, right? We can, that's CART guidance documents, whatever the case is. That information has what questions you would want to be asking. It's no different than a plan income assessment, anything you would normally do. As the producer or grower has asked you to, you know, assist with planning the design of practice, if you will, but that might be, again, but you're asking for, you know, maybe that data, how that back and forth communication talk. So more to come. I don't have an answer other than it's definitely on the radar. Just don't know the reality of that when happened. And honestly, you know, as a TSP, if you're simply designing and, you know, implementing 5.9, that's it, right? You're doing any planning, you're not feeling any questions from producers about where our priorities are and all that. Right, probably doesn't matter necessarily. But if it's more than that, which is pretty common, I know, like you guys said, could be important information transfers. Sorry, I interrupted. You had a question, statement.
Well, just a question for TSPs. Where is everybody located? I know you're in Salina, KLA. Like who, just show of hands, like who's in Northwest, like Hayes area? Who's in Southwest? Like, how are we spread out across the state as TSPs? Is my question.
I think a lot of us cover multiple areas.
Okay,
And probably some of you covered, I know multiple states too.
multiple states. Whoa, okay. So during a week, you'll drive to Nebraska, soil sample, then you go to Oklahoma and
Montana, yeah.
Montana too. Okay, well, that clarifies a lot. So,
It's just, this is a little bit of clarification. So the TSP process, you become certified for an entire state. And then you can do it for as many states as you want. Every state kind of has their own processes that are a little different. But you don't just become certified in Southeast Kansas or Saline County. It's the whole state.
Hey, Dean, do you know where those card questions and things are located? And it's to the public?
To the public, I'll have to dig.
You can send that
How
out.
we operate is within the.
I can send that out, that'd be great.
It's on SharePoint.
Yeah.
They don't have access.
Please
Oh.
make sure, if we're putting anything on the webpage or anything, please make sure it's not a SharePoint file.
Yeah, right on.
Kansas actually doesn't have too many, but national side. The amount of links I click and it's like, log into SharePoint.
You figured us out.
Hopefully the red. I don't know. I know, give me the look, I know. So
See if the third registry is.
And we already went through this 3 years ago.
Well, it's noon now, and I don't have any more information to share. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions, but I want to be respectful of your time too. So,
Appreciate it. The more of this needs to happen.
Yes.
Great.
yeah, so be thinking about what's the next practice you all want to take a dive into. And again, I know I'm talking to the specific group. several of you are sort of fighting up the practices. What's the next one that we need to take it out into? Because honestly, probably 2 hours is, good enough to scratch the surface, but you guys, about do practice at 336 is another good example, relatively new and maybe not the easiest because it is new. What else? Get that feedback back to me for that matter. So let's send the invite out for this. Jack.
Yeah, and this is kind of the first time that we've done a training like this specifically targeted towards TSPs. And if you feel like the information we covered is not applicable, let us know, or if it is applicable, that sort of thing.
So
So
here's some feedback.
Well, and like I mentioned to you, Elliot, and Dean weren't here yet, but these guys in this room are doing a good portion of it probably in the state, but this is not everybody that's taking soil sample for 590 IRs. So public communication on the webpage that everybody has access to would be awesome. Because we got a lot of guys that are just going in to co-op and says, hey, I need soil samples. So the co-op guy goes out and does it. And they're not following proper protocol. Stuff like this, that's accessible, that is, the producer can point their co-op guy or their nutrient guy to go do it, be awesome.
yeah, but I agree. I mean, a lot of it we do have to remember is it's the producer's responsibility.
Understand.
I will say I've been happy with seeing more field offices provide some of the newer documentation, like the producer checklist and stuff. I've been happy to see that those have actually been utilized quite a bit. It's getting better.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still happening.
Well, NRCS, there's a ton of new people. Never dived into any of this.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle. I mean, even folks that have been on for 20 years that never really dived into these certain practices. A common place for everybody to go to get the same bit of information instead of something from somebody and then somebody else. And I guess leaning on the area agronomist is gonna be huge going forward, but that would be nice. Full consistency.
And any new cleaning up of gray areas or anything like that, adding that to ephotog or some public place.
Yeah.
Because I get really tired of hearing, well, there was an email sent out 2.5 years ago from being told this by a person that's been on for a year. It's like,
Or it's on SharePoint.
Yeah, well, in that space, we're trying to transition almost everything we have, technical note related, any instruction, whatever it is, over to our field ops tech guide. You have to build and navigate FOTG, but it's not hard to navigate in FOTG. I mean, the search engine works. But again, I would highly encourage you, again, you have the area agronomist here, Elliot, these types of questions. We want consistency just as bad, if not worse. We demand consistency across the state for a variety of reasons, certainly on managing nutrients. Have to be consistent because we're in unprecedented times today. Next year, we're going to spend, this year, next year, we're going to spend well over $200 million on our priorities. Our quality is a priority. Nutrient management is a big element of that, right? So it's important we get this right. So,
on that piece, and I don't know if Tim's still on the call or not, but like nutrient management next year, I know CIC kind of being shuffled over there. I've been hearing a lot of concern from different places about the dollars going to nutrient management from the farmer's perspective, like making sure it's getting funded and stuff. Like any updates worthwhile sharing on potential funding? Because what I've heard is pretty minimal, which doesn't make sense to me. So I've kind of ignored it, but
So FY26 has not been built yet, at all. So we go through a public process, local work groups, technical committee, right? Instead of a subcommittee. That information then all goes to inform the state conservationists in the form of recommendations. The state conservationists make decisions based off that. So, and that also includes where we prioritize and how we prioritize our resource concerns and then the primary practices that address those concerns. So nothing new that we can share at this point for FY26 because we're starting to develop.
I was thinking 25.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Yeah, I don't, Tam, are you on?
Tim, are you still on the call?
Yeah.
They probably went to lunch.
He's at lunch.
Yeah, Tim's here. Sorry. Had to find the screen and Elliot's face. So the EQIP conservation and incentive contract for cropland in, and then the primary practice is 590. Yes, it's ready, available. The PDF is for the areas of concern that get the points is available. And so, yeah, planning, assessing, and ranking for nutrients in the surface, nutrients in the ground by applying the primary practice. Yeah, is there. Yeah, and it is, yeah, is based on area allocations. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you coming out, and those online. Thanks for hanging in with us. Sticking around. We'll talk later.